The galaxy had forgotten about humanity a long time ago. For 48,000 years, every civilization in the Orion Arm told stories about the humans as a warning to young species. They said humans were primitive creatures who destroyed their own planet with nuclear weapons before they could even leave their solar system. Every alien child learned about Earth in school as an example of what happens when a species becomes too violent and stupid. The teachers would show pictures of the ruined planet and say that this is why wisdom matters more than technology. The great powers of the galaxy had divided everything among themselves. The Kythor Dominion controlled 6,000 star systems with their powerful military fleets. The Vex Collective had mastered the ability to travel through different dimensions and could appear anywhere without warning. The ancient Safari had learned how to live forever by changing their own biology. These three empires, along with dozens of smaller civilizations, had created trade routes and peace treaties and territorial borders. They believed they were the smartest beings who had ever existed. They thought nothing could challenge their power, but they were wrong. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the command bridge of the Valiant Dawn and looked at the screens showing sensor data. The ship was massive, over 3 kilometers long, and it was just one vessel in a fleet of 5,000 warships. The entire Armada had just finished traveling through fold space, a technology that bent reality itself to move between stars instantly. They were now hiding at the edge of Kythor territory, invisible to every scanner and radar system the aliens possessed. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes. He had been alive for over 200 years thanks to human medical technology. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. His ancestors had fled Earth after the nuclear wars, hoping to find friends among the stars. Instead, they found horrors. Alien species captured human ships and sold the survivors as slaves. Some aliens used humans for medical experiments. Others hunted humans for sport. The few thousand humans who escaped went far beyond the galaxy's edge and hid in the dark space between galaxies. There they built new worlds and new technologies. They promised themselves they would return one day, strong enough that no one could ever hurt them again. Lieutenant Amy Chen spoke from her station near the weapons controls. She was young, only 50 years old, with short black hair and quick hands that moved across holographic displays. Her voice was steady as she reported the fleet status. All 5,000 ships were ready and waiting for orders. The Kythor defense platforms had not detected anything unusual. Their sensors were looking for normal engine signatures and energy patterns. They had no idea that fold space technology even existed. Dr. Henry Cole stood near the main display table. He was the chief science officer for the fleet, an old man with a white beard who had studied alien civilizations for over a century. He pulled up images of the Kythor homeworld on the holographic display. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents. Millions of Kythor lived on the surface in gleaming cities. Right now they were celebrating something called the Festival of Ascension. It was a holiday that marked 48,000 years since humanity's extinction. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The irony was almost funny. The aliens were throwing parties to celebrate the death of a species that was currently surrounding their space, with the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. He wondered what they would think when they learned the truth. Captain Lisa Ward appeared on the communication screen. She commanded the Infinite Horizon, a carrier ship that held 500 smaller fighter craft. Her face showed concern as she spoke to Morrison. She asked if they were sure about this approach. Maybe they should try talking to the aliens first before doing anything aggressive. Maybe diplomacy could work this time. Morrison shook his head. His voice was firm and cold as he explained why peaceful contact was not an option. The galaxy had already shown humanity what it thought of diplomatic relations. When human ancestors first left Earth, they reached out in friendship to every alien species they met. Those aliens responded by putting chains on human wrists. They locked humans in laboratory cages. They treated humans like animals. The survivors of those encounters learned a painful lesson that was taught with blood and suffering. The galaxy only respected strength and power. Nothing else mattered. The plan was simple and brutal. Humanity would announce its presence not with words or peace offerings, but with a demonstration of power so overwhelming that no one could doubt or question it. They would disable every single military installation in Kythor space at the exact same moment. Not one soldier would be killed. Not one ship would be destroyed. But every weapon, Every defense platform, every military computer system would simply stop working. The message would be impossible to misunderstand. Humanity could reach anywhere, strike anywhere, and there was absolutely nothing the aliens could do to prevent it or stop it. Morrison gave the command to begin the operation. His voice echoed through every ship in the fleet. It was time to remind the galaxy what humans were capable of achieving. It was time to show the aliens that their history books were wrong. Humanity had not died in nuclear fire. Humanity had evolved beyond anything the galaxy could imagine. Across 5,000 warships, weapon systems activated with a quiet hum of power. These were not the crude missiles and laser cannons that alien species used in their wars. These were quantum disruptors, devices that could selectively shut down electronic systems across distances measured in light years. Human scientists had spent thousands of years developing this technology. It could target specific types of circuits and processors while leaving everything else untouched. A quantum disruptor could turn off every military computer in a star system, while leaving civilian systems completely functional. The weapons fired in perfect synchronization. Invisible waves of quantum energy spread across Kythor space at speeds faster than light itself. Within 3 seconds, every Kythor military station went dark and silent. Defense platforms that had guarded their worlds for centuries suddenly had no power. Warships that had been patrol routes found their engines dead and their weapons offline. Communication networks that connected their military forces simply stopped transmitting. On the Kythor homeworld, the Festival of Ascension turned into chaos and panic within minutes. Military commanders screamed orders that no one could follow, because the systems needed to follow those orders no longer functioned. Scientists stared at their instruments in complete confusion, because nothing in their understanding of physics could explain what had just happened. Politicians demanded answers that no one could provide. Then Morrison sent a message that would change everything. He broadcasted on every frequency that existed, using human technology to override every communication system in Kythor space. His face appeared on billions of screens across hundreds of worlds. His voice was calm and clear as he spoke words that no one in the galaxy expected to hear. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the Human Federation. We have returned. The galaxy will now listen." The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council happened within hours of the attack on Kythor space. Representatives from 200 different species gathered in the massive council chamber on Sanctum Prime, a neutral world that belonged to no single empire. The building was ancient, constructed thousands of years ago when the first civilizations decided to create rules for how they would interact with each other. Now that building was filled with confusion and fear like it had never experienced before. High Chancellor Vexthor stood at the central podium. He was a Kythor, which meant he looked like a giant insect standing on 2 legs with 4 arms and compound eyes that glowed with an inner light. His voice shook with rage as he addressed the assembled delegates. An unknown force had crippled his people's entire military infrastructure in a matter of seconds. Their best scientists could not explain how it was done or how to fix it. Their ships remained floating in space like dead metal. This was an act of war against the Kythor Dominion, and the Council needed to respond immediately with overwhelming force. A dry and cold voice cut through the noise of the chamber. Admiral Kyle Bennett appeared on the human delegation platform, using fold space technology to simply step through reality, as if walking through a door that no one else could see. He was accompanied by Ambassador Sophie Turner and 3 security officers wearing armor that looked nothing like the bulky protective gear that other species used. The human delegation had arrived without permission, without going through security checks, without following any of the protocols that were supposed to govern council meetings. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates stood up and shouted in hundreds of different languages. Translation devices struggled to keep up with the volume of voices. Many of these aliens had never seen a human being before except in history files. They knew humans only as an extinct species, a cautionary tale told to children about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Legate Corson of the Safari spoke in a whisper that somehow carried across the entire chamber. The Safari were tall and thin, with pale skin and large eyes, looking almost like humans but not quite right in ways that made people uncomfortable. Corson's voice was filled with disbelief as he stated what everyone was thinking. Humanity died 48,000 years ago. Everyone knew this. It was historical fact. Bennett looked at the Safari representative with cold eyes and responded with 2 words that carried more weight than any speech. We got better. He was an old soldier, over 300 years old, kept alive by human medical technology that could repair damage and slow aging. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, studying every species in the galaxy, learning their strengths and weaknesses, planning how humanity would reintegrate with a galaxy that had treated their ancestors like animals. Ambassador Sophie Turner stepped forward. She was younger than Bennett, only 150 years old, with blonde hair and a diplomatic smile that did not reach her eyes. Her voice was calm and professional as she explained the situation to the Council. For millennia, this council had operated under the assumption that it represented the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. That assumption was incorrect. Humanity had been watching the galaxy from beyond the rim, from the dark space between galaxies where no one thought to look. They had been advancing their technology far beyond anything the Council species possessed. Prime Speaker Thelnax of the Vex Collective rose to speak. The Vex were crystalline beings, their bodies made of living glass that refracted light into rainbow patterns. Thelnax's voice rang like bells as he expressed outrage at the situation. The humans had attacked a council member without provocation, and now they dared to demand recognition. This was unacceptable. The council should mobilize the entire galactic fleet and crush this upstart species before they became a real threat. Bennett pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The image showed the current positions of human vessels throughout the galaxy. There were not 5,000 ships as the Kythor had detected. There were 50,000 warships, spread across every major civilization in perfect coordination. Each empire, each kingdom, each federation had human vessels positioned near their core worlds, invisible to their sensors, waiting for orders. Bennett's voice was quiet, but everyone heard him clearly. The Council could try to mobilize their fleets if they wanted, but before a single alien warship left its dock, humanity would disable every military vessel, every defense station, every weapon platform in the entire galaxy. The demonstration on Kythor space had been a small test of their capabilities. They could do the same thing to everyone, everywhere, all at the same time, with no warning and no defense possible. The chamber fell into complete silence. Even the most aggressive delegates understood the mathematics of the situation. If humanity truly possessed the technological capability they claimed, then military resistance was impossible. Fighting would accomplish nothing except demonstrating the futility of opposition. High Chancellor Vexthor's voice was defeated as he asked the question that everyone wanted answered. What did humanity want from the galaxy? What were their demands? What price must be paid to avoid further demonstrations of human power? Ambassador Turner took control of the conversation. Her demands were clear and comprehensive. Humanity wanted what had been denied to their ancestors when they first reached out to the stars. They wanted a permanent seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. They wanted recognition as a sovereign power with territorial rights. But most importantly, they wanted a complete restructuring of galactic law. The days of slavery were over. The practice of genetic experimentation on sentient beings would end immediately. The constant territorial wars that had defined galactic politics for millennia would stop. Humanity was here to enforce a new order whether the Council liked it or not. Legate Corson protested that humanity could not simply dictate terms to the entire galaxy. The combined populations of Council species numbered in the trillions. Humans were a tiny fraction of galactic population. Numbers had to matter in a democratic system. Bennett's response was brutal in its simplicity. Numbers were completely irrelevant when you were fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's technology. The aliens were using weapons and tactics that humanity had surpassed thousands of years ago. In a direct military conflict, the entire galactic fleet would be neutralized within hours, not days or weeks. Every military commander in this chamber knew that fighting with disabled weapons against an enemy who could strike from anywhere was not a battle, but a massacre. Senator Patricia Cole materialized beside Bennett and Turner. She was humanity's chief legal expert, an older woman with gray hair who had spent 2 centuries studying every law and treaty that governed galactic civilization. She distributed documents to every delegate's personal terminal. These were humanity's proposed reforms to the Galactic Charter. the document that served as a constitution for civilized space. The delegates had one standard week to review the proposals and prepare their responses. After 7 days, humanity expected compliance. The key points were non-negotiable and would be enforced with military power if necessary. The reforms included immediate abolition of all slavery and indentured servitude regardless of species or circumstance. They included strict rules of warfare that protected civilian populations and prisoners. They mandated the creation of an independent enforcement body with representatives from all species but with human oversight. Most controversially, they guaranteed fundamental rights to every sentient being regardless of whether their species had political power or military strength. Thelnax asked the question that everyone was thinking. What would happen if the Council refused these demands? What if the assembled civilizations decided that accepting human terms was worse than fighting? Bennett's answer contained no threats or bluster, just cold statement of fact. If the Council refused, humanity would enforce compliance through military action. They would prefer cooperation. They would prefer to join the galactic community as partners working together toward common goals. But the delegates needed to understand clearly that the age of humanity being victims was permanently over. Humans had the power to reshape galactic civilization by force, and they would use that power if necessary. The choice belonged to the Council, but the outcome was inevitable. As the Council session dissolved into heated debate and argument, Turner turned to Bennett and spoke quietly. She asked if he truly believed the aliens would accept these terms. Could centuries of tradition and thousands of years of established power structures really change because one species demanded it? Bennett watched the delegates, arguing amongst themselves, and his expression never changed. They did not have a choice in any meaningful sense. They just did not know it yet, because accepting that fact meant accepting that everything they believed about their place in the galaxy was wrong. But they would learn eventually, just as humanity learned during the long exile in the darkness between galaxies. The universe taught every species the same lesson eventually: adapt to new realities or perish in the past. The Safari were the oldest living species in the known galaxy. They had achieved sentience and built their first civilizations nearly 200,000 years ago, when most other species were still primitive animals living in caves. The Safari had survived every crisis and every war through a combination of clever diplomacy and their mastery of biological sciences. They could modify their own genetic code to adapt to any environment or threat. They had achieved biological immortality, which meant individual Safari could live for tens of thousands of years if they chose. When the Galactic Council's deadline approached and most species grudgingly prepared to accept humanity's demands, the Safari leadership had very different plans. Dr. Claire Manning was humanity's leading expert on alien biology. She worked aboard the research vessel Scientific Pioneer, a ship designed specifically for studying the biological and genetic characteristics of other species. For decades, Manning had been analyzing the biological samples that human scouts had collected from various alien civilizations during the long years of watching from beyond the galaxy's edge. When her analysis of Safari genetic material revealed something extraordinary and disturbing, she immediately sent an encrypted message to Fleet Command. Manning's face appeared on the communication screen in Admiral Bennett's office. Her expression was grim as she delivered her report. The Safari biological immortality was not natural evolution as their official history claimed. It was engineered through deliberate genetic modification. Based on the specific genetic markers she was detecting in her samples, the base template for Safari immortality research was human DNA. Somehow, the Safari had obtained human genetic material and had been using it as the foundation for their biological experiments for thousands of years. Commander Jake Morrison leaned forward in his chair as he listened to Manning's report from the bridge of the Valiant Dawn. His voice was carefully controlled as he asked her to explain exactly what she had discovered and what it meant. Manning pulled up complex genetic sequences on the shared display. She explained that 48,000 years ago, when human ancestors first fled the nuclear devastation of Earth, not all of them made it to safety. The Safari had captured at least one colony ship, possibly more. They had been using human genetic material as the foundation for their biological research ever since. Human DNA possessed a natural resilience and adaptability that the Safari found extremely valuable. The genetic diversity she was detecting suggested something even worse. There was a facility on Talcoris, one of the Safari research moons. Based on the range of genetic variations in the samples, Manning estimated they had at least 10,000 humans in captivity, all descendants of those original prisoners from 48,000 years ago. Lieutenant Amy Chen stood up from her weapons station. Her voice was horrified as she asked if Manning was truly saying that the Safari had been experimenting on living humans for all this time. For thousands and thousands of years, they had kept humans as laboratory subjects. Manning's answer was even worse than the question. Not just experimenting. Breeding. The Safari had maintained entire breeding populations of humans, carefully controlling their reproduction to ensure a steady supply of genetic material for research. The humans on Talcoris had no idea that their species had survived and thrived beyond the galaxy. They had been told their entire lives that they were the last humans in existence, that they should be grateful to the Safari for preserving their species. The revelation changed everything about humanity's approach to the Council negotiations. Morrison immediately contacted Ambassador Turner and Admiral Bennett. Within hours, an emergency meeting was convened. Humanity's diplomatic stance shifted from negotiation to ultimatum. There would be no more discussions about the Safari situation. There would be demands followed by immediate action. Admiral Bennett appeared before the Galactic Council without warning or permission. He used fold space technology to materialize directly in the center of the chamber, bypassing every security system and guard post. His face was cold with controlled fury as he delivered humanity's ultimatum to Legate Corson. The Safari had 48 hours to release every human held on Talcoris and to open all Safari research facilities for immediate inspection by human observers. Failure to comply would result in military action against Safari territory. Corson attempted to maintain his diplomatic composure. His voice was calm as he denied the accusations. He claimed that he had no knowledge of any humans on Talcoris. The entire premise was based on false information or misunderstandings. Humanity had been extinct for thousands of years. How could the Safari possibly have human prisoners? Dr. Manning appeared beside Bennett through fold space transport. She carried a data tablet that contained irrefutable evidence. They had DNA sequences that proved Safari immortality treatments were based on human genetics. They had orbital scans that showed the electromagnetic signature of a large facility on Talcoris that matched exactly with biological research installations. They had even intercepted Safari communications discussing what to do about the human problem now that humanity had returned to the galaxy. The other council members watched the exchange with growing unease and concern. If the Safari had truly kept humans as experimental subjects for millennia, it would validate everything humanity had claimed about the cruelty and moral corruption of galactic civilization. It would prove that humanity's demands for reform were not unreasonable, but absolutely necessary. Corson insisted that this was all a misunderstanding. Any humans present at Safari facilities were there voluntarily. They were descendants of humans who had chosen centuries ago to work with the Safari on medical research. They were treated well and compensated fairly for their contributions to science. Captain Nathan Price commanded the stealth ship Shadow Strike. He had been listening to the council proceedings from his position in orbit around Talcoris. His ship was invisible to Safari sensors, using technology that bent light and absorbed all emissions. Price had his orders. If the Safari denied the accusations and refused to cooperate, he was authorized to obtain proof through direct observation. Price spoke quietly into his communication system. His ship descended through the research moon's atmosphere without triggering a single alarm. The cameras mounted on the Shadow Strike's hull recorded everything they saw. What they revealed was far worse than anyone had imagined or feared. The Talcoris facility was massive, covering hundreds of square kilometers. It housed not 10,000 humans but nearly 50,000. They were kept in sterile white environments with controlled temperature and lighting. The humans were subjected to constant genetic modification experiments. Some were deliberately exposed to diseases so the Safari could study human immune responses. Others had their DNA altered to see how it affected their physical abilities. Children were born in this facility and had never seen the outside world. Elderly humans who had spent their entire lives in captivity worked as assistants to their Safari captors, not realizing they were prisoners rather than employees. Price transmitted the footage directly to the council chamber through a secure channel. The images appeared on the central holographic display where every delegate could see them clearly. There was no way to deny or dismiss what the cameras showed. Humans in containment cells with identification numbers tattooed on their arms, children being injected with experimental compounds, while safari scientists recorded the results. Elderly humans who had lived their entire lives believing they were the last of their kind, working in laboratories because they had never known any other existence. The council chamber fell into shocked and horrified silence. Even species that had been hostile to humanity's return looked visibly disturbed by the images. This was not warfare or normal political conflict. This was systematic abuse of sentient beings over thousands of years. Ambassador Turner's voice shook with controlled fury as she addressed the council. The Safari had violated the most fundamental principles of sentient dignity. They had kept an entire population enslaved for genetic experimentation across multiple generations. This was exactly why humanity had demanded comprehensive galactic reform. This was proof that the old system was morally bankrupt and could not be allowed to continue. Commander Morrison gave the order that everyone knew was coming. Captain Price was authorized to secure the facility immediately. All human ships were ordered to move into defensive positions around Talcoris. Any safari vessel that approached the moon would be disabled without warning. Within minutes, the human fleet had surrounded Talcoris in a perfect sphere of warships. Marine teams led by Captain Alex Stone used fold space technology to transport directly into the facility's corridors. They appeared inside the building without breaching any walls or doors. The Safari guards, armed with conventional energy weapons, found themselves completely outmatched by humans wearing advanced combat armor and carrying weapons that could stun entire groups instantly, without causing permanent harm. Captain Stone reached the main containment area where thousands of humans were held. He opened the sealed doors using override codes that human intelligence had obtained weeks earlier. The revelation of the Safari experiments had fractured the Galactic Council in ways that no one could have predicted. Species that had been skeptical of humanity's return now faced undeniable evidence of the galaxy's moral corruption and systematic abuse of sentient beings. But not every civilization was willing to accept humanity's authority or demands. Some species saw the reforms as an attack on their sovereignty and independence. Others feared that accepting human dominance would mean becoming subservient to a species they had considered extinct and primitive. The Vex Collective was particularly resistant to the new order. They were confident in their dimensional travel technology and believed it gave them a decisive advantage over human forces. High Coordinator Zalvor was a calculating leader who saw humanity's technological superiority as a temporary condition that could be overcome through clever strategy and decisive action. He convened a secret meeting of 12 species who absolutely refused to accept the reforms that humanity was demanding. They called themselves the Preservation Front and claimed they were defending galactic sovereignty against human imperialism and tyranny. Zilvor's voice rang like crystal bells as he explained his strategy to the assembled delegates. Humanity possessed impressive technology, but they lacked one crucial capability that the Vex had mastered. Dimensional technology allowed the Vex to attack from angles that conventional forces could not predict or defend against. If the Preservation Front struck first with overwhelming force and targeted humanity's key command vessels, they could shatter human cohesion and force them into a negotiated settlement. The key was surprise and decisive application of force against critical targets. What the Preservation Front did not know was that humanity had infiltrated their communications months ago. Lieutenant Rachel Morrison was Commander Jake Morrison's daughter and a specialist in signals intelligence and cryptography. She had spent years developing systems to monitor and decode alien communications. Within hours of the secret meeting's conclusion, Rachel had decoded every word spoken and delivered a complete transcript to her father. Rachel stood in her father's office aboard the Valiant Dawn and displayed the intelligence data on his desk screen. Her voice was grim as she explained what the Preservation Front was planning. They intended to hit humanity simultaneously across 12 different star systems. They believed dimensional attacks would bypass human defenses completely. Their primary targets were the flagship vessels and the medical ships carrying the freed humans from Talcoris. They wanted to kill the prisoners to eliminate the evidence of Safari crimes. Commander Morrison felt cold fury settle over him like ice water. After everything the galaxy had witnessed, after all the evidence of cruelty and abuse, These species still chose violence and aggression. They learned nothing from history. They understood nothing except force. He immediately contacted Admiral Bennett and Ambassador Turner. It was time for humanity to demonstrate the full extent of their capabilities and end any doubt about human technological superiority. The Preservation Front launched their attack 3 days later during what they thought was a moment of human vulnerability. Vex-dimensional ships appeared directly above human vessels without any warning or energy signature. They opened shimmering portals in the fabric of space itself and unleashed devastating energy weapons designed to cut through shields and armor. In conventional warfare, this dimensional assault would have been an overwhelming and unstoppable advantage. Enemy targets would have no warning, no time to raise defensive shields or deploy countermeasures. It should have been a massacre, but humanity had prepared for exactly this possibility. Dr. Henry Cole and his team of scientists had been studying dimensional physics for centuries during the long exile. They understood how the Vex technology worked and had developed specific countermeasures. The moment the Vex portals began opening, human ships activated dimensional anchors. These devices locked local space-time into a rigid configuration that prevented any further dimensional travel in or out of the affected area. It was like freezing water into ice, making movement through dimensions impossible. The Vex ships suddenly found themselves trapped in normal space, unable to retreat through their dimensional portals or call for reinforcements. Human vessels, which had appeared to be caught completely off guard and defenseless, revealed they had been tracking the dimensional energy signatures all along. Their sensors had detected the Vex ships preparing to attack hours before the portals opened. Commander Morrison's voice was calm and cold as he gave orders to the entire fleet. All ships were to execute containment protocol immediately. Within seconds, the attacking Vex fleet was surrounded by human vessels that had folded in from positions throughout the star system. Quantum disruptors fired with surgical precision, disabling weapon systems and propulsion drives without destroying the ships or harming their crews. The entire ambush was neutralized in under 2 minutes. Not a single human ship suffered damage. Not one crew member was injured. Admiral Bennett opened a communication channel directly to the captured Vex crews. His message was broadcast so that every Preservation Front species could hear what he said. The Vex had just violated every rule of warfare that humanity had proposed in their reforms. They launched a surprise attack on vessels operating under diplomatic immunity. They deliberately targeted freed prisoners of war, who were protected under the most basic conventions of civilized conflict. And they failed completely and utterly. Their best technology and their best strategy accomplished nothing except demonstrating their own inadequacy. Captain Lisa Ward was monitoring the situation from her position aboard the Infinite Horizon. Her sensors tracked the movements of the other 11 Preservation Front species. Warning indicators flashed across her tactical displays. The other species were mobilizing their military fleets. It appeared they were committing to full-scale war against humanity, despite the failure of the Vex dimensional attack. Bennett's response was immediate and definitive. Let them come. It was time the galaxy learned this lesson once and for all. Humanity had survived extinction and crossed the vast emptiness of intergalactic space. They rebuilt their entire civilization in the cold darkness between galaxies. They did not come this far, and endure this much to be threatened by species who learned nothing from their own history or mistakes. The Battle of the Seven Systems began within the hour, and lasted 6 hours total. 11 species threw everything they possessed at human forces. They attacked with conventional weapons and experimental technology. They tried biological warfare agents and cyber attacks. They coordinated their assaults across multiple star systems, using every tactical advantage they had developed over millennia of warfare and conflict. Their combined fleets numbered over 100,000 warships crewed by millions of trained soldiers. Humanity countered every single move with technologies the galaxy had never encountered. Fold space travel allowed human ships to be in multiple locations simultaneously. AI coordination networks meant every human vessel acted as part of a single distributed intelligence, rather than individual ships. Quantum weapons disabled enemy ships without causing casualties or permanent damage. Dimensional anchors prevented enemy retreat or the arrival of reinforcements. Human forces fought with a level of coordination and technological sophistication that made the conflict completely one-sided. Commander Morrison watched from the bridge of the Valiant. Dawn as enemy fleets were systematically neutralized across 7 different star systems. Tactical displays showed the battle progress in real time. Not a single enemy ship was destroyed. Not a single enemy crew member was killed. But every vessel in the Preservation Front's combined forces was disabled and captured within 6 hours of combat beginning. The human fleet suffered 0 casualties and minimal damage. Morrison broadcast a message to all captured crews. His voice carried across hundreds of disabled ships drifting in space. This is what mercy looks like when delivered by a superior force. Humanity could have destroyed every ship and killed every crew member. They possessed the technology and firepower to sterilize entire planets if they chose. But they deliberately chose restraint. They chose to disable rather than destroy. They chose to capture rather than kill. The captured crews needed to remember this moment when their governments considered whether to accept human terms or continue pointless. Resistance Ambassador Sophie Turner addressed the Galactic Council while the battle's outcome was still being processed by shocked delegates. Her message was absolutely clear and permitted no misunderstanding. Humanity had no desire to conquer the galaxy or rule over other species. They had no interest in building an empire or extracting tribute from defeated enemies. But they would not tolerate the abuses and cruelty that had defined galactic civilization for millennia. The slavery would end. The genetic experiments would stop. The constant warfare would be replaced by enforced peace. Senator Patricia Cole distributed the final version of humanity's reform documents to every council member. These were the absolute final terms with no room for further negotiation or compromise. The Sefri would face trial for crimes against sentience. 6 months had passed since the Battle of the Seven Systems, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have imagined. The Galactic Council reconvened in a new chamber built on Earth itself, constructed on the very planet where humanity's story began. The location was rebuilt from the nuclear ruins that had supposedly marked humanity's extinction 48,000 years ago. The symbolism was deliberate and powerful. The species that the galaxy had written off as extinct and forgotten now hosted the center of galactic government on their ancestral homeworld. Commander Jake Morrison stood in the gardens outside the new council building, watching delegates from hundreds of species arrive for the ratification ceremony. The Sentient Rights Charter would be signed today, marking the official beginning of what historians were already calling the Second Galactic Age. Ships from across the galaxy descended through Earth's atmosphere in a carefully choreographed sequence. Each vessel represented a civilization that had once considered humanity beneath notice. Now they came as equals, or perhaps as subordinates, to sign a document that would fundamentally change how galactic civilization functioned. Admiral Kyle Bennett joined Morrison in the gardens. Both men wore ceremonial uniforms rather than the combat gear they had lived in for months. Bennett's voice was thoughtful as he observed that it felt strange to be hosting a celebration of peace after spending so long preparing for war. 6 months ago, they were planning military strikes and contingency operations. Today, they were greeting diplomatic delegations and attending formal ceremonies. Morrison's response was measured and realistic. This was peace enforced at gunpoint rather than peace achieved through mutual understanding. He was not naive enough to believe that every species present had genuinely changed their beliefs or values. They had changed their behavior because humanity made the alternative impossible to contemplate. Fear and overwhelming power had accomplished what diplomacy and moral arguments never could. Dr. Claire Manning approached them with her final report on the freed humans from Talchorus and other hidden facilities throughout the galaxy. In the 6 months since the rescue operations began, humanity had recovered nearly 200,000 descendants of the original exiles. These people had been scattered across secret research stations and breeding facilities that various species had maintained. Most had no idea that humanity had survived and returned to the galaxy in strength. Morrison asked how the freed populations were adapting to their new reality. Many of them had spent their entire lives in captivity. Some had been born in laboratory environments and knew nothing of normal human society. The psychological trauma of their experiences would take years or decades to heal properly. Manning's report was cautiously optimistic. The freed humans were adapting better than initial projections had suggested. Many were understandably angry at the galaxy that had imprisoned and exploited them, but Ambassador Turner had been working closely with representatives from the freed populations. She was channeling that anger into productive purpose. The freed humans were becoming humanity's most effective diplomats and advocates. When they spoke about why galactic reform was necessary, when they testified about their personal experiences. No one could argue with their lived reality. Their voices carried weight that political speeches never could. Inside the council chamber, Ambassador Sophie Turner prepared for the ceremony. Senator Patricia Cole had drafted every word of the charter's language, but Turner would present it to the assembled delegates. The document was comprehensive and revolutionary. It abolished slavery in all forms across every species and territory. It established strict rules of warfare that protected civilian populations and required humane treatment of prisoners. It created an independent enforcement body with representatives from all species, but with humans holding veto authority. Most importantly, it guaranteed fundamental rights to every sentient being regardless of their species' political power or military strength. The ceremony began with High Chancellor Vexthor of the Kythor approaching the signing platform. The Kythor were the first species humanity had struck, and the first to accept the new order. Vexthor's voice was humble as he spoke to the assembled delegates. The Kythor Dominion recognized that their old ways had led to stagnation and permitted cruelty. They welcomed humanity's return not as conquerors imposing their will, but as the moral conscience that galactic civilization had been lacking. They signed the charter freely and with genuine commitment to its principles. One by one, species representatives approached the platform and added their signatures. Some did so with genuine conviction and relief that the old system was ending. Others signed with obvious reluctance, understanding they had no real choice in the matter. But every delegate understood the fundamental mathematics of power that now governed the galaxy. Humanity's technological superiority was not a temporary advantage that could be overcome with time and research. The humans had 48,000 years of advancement gained during their exile beyond the galactic rim. That gap would take millennia to close even with full cooperation and technology sharing. When Legate Corson of the Safari approached the platform, the chamber fell into complete silence. The Safari had been tried by a tribunal of judges from multiple species and found guilty of crimes against sentience. Their government had been restructured completely. Their research facilities had been open to inspection by independent observers. Their entire leadership class had been replaced with younger Safari who recognized the moral bankruptcy of their predecessors' actions. Corson's voice was quiet and filled with genuine shame as he addressed the council. The Safari Republic acknowledged their crimes without excuse or justification. They had exploited humanity when humans were vulnerable and helpless. They were grateful that humanity proved more merciful to them than they had been to their captives. They signed the charter as a solemn promise that they would never again abuse their biological knowledge to harm other sentient beings. The final signature came from Captain Alex Stone, representing the freed human populations. His people, who had spent generations in captivity, had voted unanimously to join the Human Federation, rather than maintain separate political identities. Stone had been the first human to enter the Talcoris facility and free the prisoners there. Now he stood before the galaxy as proof that the reforms were real and necessary. Stone's voice was strong and clear as he made his declaration. They signed as living proof that the charter was not empty words or political theater. They were the breathing evidence of what the old galaxy had permitted and tolerated. They were also proof that change was possible and redemption could be earned. They forgave the species who had wronged them, but they would never forget what happened. They would ensure that no other species suffered the way they had suffered. As the ceremony concluded, delegates moved to a reception in the rebuilt gardens where Earth's native plants had been restored after thousands of years of nuclear contamination. Species that had never communicated before engaged in careful diplomatic conversations. The Kythor and the Vex Collective discussed trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The Safari and freed humans talked about collaborative medical research under strict ethical guidelines and oversight. Former enemies were learning to become cautious partners. Lieutenant Rachel Morrison found her father watching the scene with mixed emotions. She observed that he looked like he was expecting another attack or crisis. After spending so long preparing for conflict, it seemed he could not relax even in victory. Morrison admitted that old habits were hard to break. For decades, they had prepared for military confrontation. Now they had to learn to manage peace and stability. That might prove harder than winning the war had been. Creating lasting change in galactic civilization would require sustained effort over generations. Admiral Bennett joined them with Ambassador Turner at his side. Bennett reported that Captain Lisa Ward had sent word from the outer fleets. All remaining holdout factions and resistant species had formally accepted the charter. The galaxy was finally unified under one comprehensive set of laws for the first time in recorded history. Turner wondered aloud if it would last. Would the reforms endure, or would species eventually rebel once they developed countermeasures to human technology? Would the children of this generation honor commitments their parents made under duress? Dr. Henry Cole joined the group holding a glass of wine made from earth grapes. He stated with confidence that rebellion would not happen. Humanity was not keeping their technology secret or maintaining their advantage through monopoly. The charter included specific provisions for gradual technology sharing and scientific cooperation. In a few generations, every species would have access to fold space travel and quantum computing and dimensional anchors. The technological gap would close naturally over time. Rachel asked the obvious question: would sharing technology eliminate humanity's advantage and leave them vulnerable again? Once everyone possessed the same capabilities, what would prevent a return to the old system of exploitation and warfare? Morrison's answer reflected wisdom gained through bitter experience.